The Mapmaker's Correction. Part 1. The Atlas of the Unseen. In a quiet, dusty corner of Bloomsbury, London, nestled between modern bookstores and bustling cafes, stood the cartographic workshop of Arden and Son. It was less a shop and more a sanctuary dedicated to a dying art. The air smelled of old paper, ink, and the faint, acidic tang of copperplate etchant. Sunlight struggled through a large, north-facing bay window, illuminating walls lined with antique maps, celestial charts dreaming of forgotten stars, and terrestrial maps whispering of lands long since renamed. This was the world of Alistair Arden, the third generation of a family whose legacy was not measured in land or gold, but in lines on a page. The Ardens were not mere mapmakers. They were geographical philosophers. They believed a map was not just a tool for navigation, but a portrait of a place's soul, capturing not only its physical form but its history, its culture, and its hidden patterns. The pinnacle of the Arden legacy, their magnum opus, was a project started by Alistair's grandfather, the Tessera Atlas. It was not a conventional atlas of countries and capitals. It was an atlas of the unseen, the intangible forces that shape human civilization. Each map was a tessera, a small tile in a grand mosaic. One map might chart the global spread of a single folktale, its lines tracing migration routes and cultural exchanges. Another might visualize the flow of rare earth minerals, revealing the invisible economic arteries connecting a Congolese mine to a smartphone factory in Shenzhen. Another still might map the acoustic shadows in a dense city, areas of uncanny quiet amidst the urban roar. The Tessera Atlas was a work of profound, interdisciplinary genius, blending geography with anthropology, economics, and data science. It was built on the Arden family's secret method, a proprietary algorithm they called the geospatial correlator. Developed by Alistair's brilliant but reclusive father, the correlator was a set of complex mathematical principles that could analyze vast, disparate datasets and reveal hidden, meaningful patterns. It was the heart of their art, the engine that allowed them to see the world in a way no one else could. Alistair's father had spent his life refining the algorithm, leaving behind notebooks filled with dense equations and a single, powerful piece of software locked on an old, air-gapped computer in the workshop. His final charge to Alistair was clear. Don't just map the world, Alistair. Show them how it truly connects. Alistair, a man in his mid-30s, was a perfect product of his environment. He was quiet and studious, with an almost monastic devotion to his work. He saw the world in layers of data, finding more beauty in a well-rendered isoplethe than in a sunset. Fulfilling the promise of the Tessera Atlas was the singular focus of his life. He was the keeper of the family's unique vision. This quiet world was shattered by the arrival of Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a charismatic force of nature, a celebrated tech evangelist and the founder of Aura, a global data analytics firm that was the darling of Silicon Valley. Aura's mission statement, plastered on billboards and in slick commercials, was mapping the future of human connection. Thorne was a master of a different kind of map-making, the mapping of consumer behavior, social networks, and predictive analytics. He was a man of TED Talks, keynote speeches, and billion-dollar funding rounds. He came to the Bloomsbury workshop with an almost reverential air. He claimed to have been a long-time, secret admirer of the Ardens' work, which he'd discovered through an obscure academic journal. He spoke Alistair's language, not the language of ink and paper, but of data, algorithms, and pattern recognition. He was mesmerized by the concept of the Tessera Atlas. Alistair, what you and your family have done here is art, Thorne said, his voice resonating with convincing sincerity. But it deserves to be more than art. It deserves to be science. It deserves a global platform. Thorne laid out a vision that was both terrifying and seductive. He spoke of taking the Arden legacy and scaling it for the entire world. He wanted to integrate the geospatial correlator algorithm into Aura's massive data infrastructure. Together, he proposed, they could create the most powerful and insightful map of humanity ever conceived. A living, breathing Aura Arden global tessera. He offered a partnership. Alistair would be the chief cartographic officer of the new division. Arden and Son would be acquired by Aura, but Alistair would retain full creative control over the Tessera project. The contract was dense, filled with clauses about stock options, intellectual property licensing, and data integration protocols. Thorne's lawyers assured Alistair it was a standard tech partnership agreement designed to protect both parties. Alistair, a man who understood the complex topography of the Himalayas but not the treacherous landscape of a term sheet, was persuaded. He saw a chance to finally fulfill his father's grand vision on a scale he could never have imagined. He signed. The professional betrayal was executed with the cold, silent efficiency of a line of code. For the first year, the partnership was a dream. Alistair was given a team of Aura's brightest engineers. He worked tirelessly, integrating the delicate, artisanal logic of the correlator into Aura's brutal, cloud-based architecture. He handed over his father's notebooks, his algorithms, and his family's lifetime of research. The moment the integration was complete, the dream ended. One morning, Alistair arrived at the Aura campus to find his access credentials had been revoked. A terse email from Aura's legal department informed him that his consulting role in the transition was complete. His stock options, he discovered, were tied to a vesting schedule that had not yet been met. He was escorted from the premises. Thorne had everything he needed. He had the algorithm. He had the methodology. He had the Arden name, which he now owned as a corporate asset. A few weeks later, Marcus Thorne stood on a stage in San Francisco at Aura's annual conference and unveiled his masterpiece, Aura Terra, a revolutionary platform that he claimed his team had developed in-house. He spoke of being inspired by certain classical cartographic principles, but presented the core innovation as his own. Alistair was not just fired, he was erased. The Arden name, associated with cartography for a century, was now a mere trademark owned by Aura, soon to be retired. When Alistair threatened legal action, he found himself facing a legal firewall. The contract he had signed had given Aura full ownership of all derivative works created during the partnership. His own work of integrating the family algorithm into Aura's system had legally stripped him of the rights to it. He was financially and legally ruined. The workshop in Bloomsbury sold to cover his initial court costs. The world hailed Marcus Thorne as a visionary, the man who had finally cracked the code of global human dynamics. Aura's valuation skyrocketed. Thorne was the new king of data, his face on magazine covers, his pronouncements on the future treated as gospel. Alistair Arden disappeared. He became a ghost in the machine he had helped to build. The legacy of his family had been stolen, digitized, and sold to the highest bidder. But in the quiet ruin of his old life, a new map began to form in his mind. It was not a map of land or data, but a map of vengeance. He could not fight Thorne with money or lawyers. He could not hack into Aura's systems, so he would fight him with his own art. He would use the very principles of cartography, of truth, accuracy, and revealing the unseen, to expose Thorne not as a visionary, but as a thief. He would create a single, perfect map that would tear down Thorne's entire empire of lies. Part 2. The Cartographer in Exile. For 10 years, the world forgot Alistair Arden. He adopted a new identity, Arthur Wynne, and took a humble job as a data archivist at the University of Iceland in Reykjavik. He chose Iceland for its isolation, its stark, elemental beauty, and for its world-class geological data archives. He lived a life of quiet anonymity, a man whose only passion appeared to be the cataloging of seismic charts and glacial melt patterns. His exile was a period of intense, monastic focus. The fire of his anger had cooled into a geological pressure, slowly forming a diamond of pure, cold purpose. He knew a direct attack on Thorne was impossible. Aura's data was a fortress, its public image impregnable. To expose Thorne, he couldn't just tell the world Thorne was a liar. He had to show them. He had to create a cartographic proof so elegant, so undeniable, and so public that it could not be ignored. His plan was a masterpiece of intellectual warfare, a long-form gambit that would leverage Thorne's own ego against him. He knew that Thorne, for all his talk of a global community, had a pet project that was deeply personal, the Thorne Foundation Global Prize. It was an annual, multi-million-dollar award given to a project that used data to create a more connected and sustainable future. The prize was Thorne's monument to his own perceived benevolence, and the award ceremony was a major international media event, attended by world leaders, academics, and philanthropists. Thorne himself chaired the selection committee. This would be Alistair's stage. Alistair, as Wynne, would create a project so profound and so aligned with the prize's mission that Thorne would be forced to award it to him. But the project itself would be a Trojan Horse. It would be a map, but a map with a hidden, devastating layer of truth. He called his project the Palimpsest Initiative. A palimpsest is a manuscript page from which the text has been scraped or washed off so that the page can be reused, but where traces of the original writing remain. Alistair's project would be a global map that revealed these ghosts in the landscape, the faint, lingering traces of forgotten histories and their unseen influence on the present. His method was a brilliant fusion of his family's art and his newfound scientific rigor. He could no longer use the correlator algorithm. Thorne owned that. So, over the course of a decade, he built a new one from scratch. It was a different kind of engine, less powerful but far more subtle. It was designed not to find patterns in massive, real-time datasets, but to find echoes, dissonances, and absences in historical and geological records. He focused on a single, obscure case study, the remote Westfjords of Iceland. It was a region of stunning, desolate beauty, but it was also a place of deep economic decline and depopulation. Using his new algorithm, Alistair began to cross-reference seemingly unrelated datasets. 19th-century fishing logs, geological surveys of volcanic ash layers, modern satellite imagery of lichen growth, local genealogical records, and even the linguistic drift in regional folklore. His algorithm began to reveal a stunning, hidden story. It found a direct correlation between the settlement patterns of the 1800s and a specific, long-forgotten volcanic eruption in the 1700s. The ash from that eruption had subtly altered the soil's pH, which in turn affected the types of grasses that grew, which influenced where sheep herds grazed, which determined where farms were built. Generations later, these subtle environmental factors were still influencing property values, migration patterns, and even public health outcomes in the 21st century. He had mapped an invisible chain of cause and effect stretching across 3 centuries. He had revealed the ghost in the landscape. He presented his findings as the work of Arthur Wynne, a humble archivist. The project was a work of pure, unassailable academic brilliance. It was elegant, profound, and visually stunning. He created interactive maps where a user could literally peel back the layers of time, seeing the ghost of the past shimmering beneath the surface of the present. He submitted the Palimpsest Initiative to the Thorne Foundation Global Prize. As he had predicted, the project was a sensation among the prize's academic reviewers. It was hailed as a revolutionary new methodology in geospatial humanities. The selection committee was unanimous. Marcus Thorne, beaming for the cameras, announced that the winner of the $10 million global prize was a little-known archivist from Iceland named Arthur Wynne for his visionary Palimpsest initiative. The trap was set. Thorne had just publicly and financially endorsed the weapon of his own destruction. The award ceremony was to be held in 2 months at the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo. It was there, on Thorne's own stage, that Alistair would reveal the final, devastating layer of his map. Part 3. The correction on the world stage. The Nobel Peace Center in Oslo was a cathedral of global humanism. The air was thick with earnest conversation and the quiet clinking of champagne glasses. Marcus Thorne was in his element, holding court, accepting praise for his foundation's wisdom in discovering such a brilliant, humble talent as Arthur Wynne. Alistair, as Wynne, played his part perfectly. He was shy, overwhelmed, and deeply grateful. He shook Thorne's hand, his expression one of humble awe. Thorne, basking in the glow of his own magnanimity, saw only a harmless academic he had plucked from obscurity. The centerpiece of the evening was to be the laureate's address. Arthur Wynne was scheduled to give a 20-minute presentation on the Palimpsest Initiative. A massive, high-definition screen behind the podium was prepared to display his maps. Alistair walked to the podium. He began his presentation, his voice quiet but clear. He walked the distinguished audience through his methodology, explaining his case study of the Icelandic Westfjords. He showed them the beautiful, layered maps, the ghosts of volcanic ash and forgotten farms. The audience was captivated. Thorne sat in the front row, a proud, paternal smile on his face. Then, in the final 5 minutes of his presentation, Alistair paused. "The palimpsest initiative, as you've seen it, is a proof of concept," he said, his voice gaining a new, hard edge of authority. "It demonstrates that by analyzing the ghosts in historical data, we can uncover the hidden forces that shape our present. But this methodology is not limited to geology and folklore. It can also be applied to the history of ideas, to the provenance of innovation." A flicker of unease crossed Thorne's face. "For my final exhibit," Alistair continued, "I have applied the palimpsest methodology to a different kind of map, the map of a corporate legacy. Specifically, the innovation behind Ora Terra." He clicked a button. The beautiful map of Iceland on the screen behind him dissolved, replaced by a complex, spiderweb-like diagram. On one side was a node labeled Arden and Son, Cartographers, 1920 to 2025. On the other side was a node labeled Ora Terra, 2026. Connecting them was a dense network of lines, each one a documented piece of data. "What you are seeing," Alistair said, his voice now ringing with power through the silent hall, "is a ghost, the ghost of a stolen legacy." He began to walk the audience through the new map. Each line was a piece of evidence he had meticulously gathered over 10 years. He showed excerpts from his grandfather's published academic papers from the 1960s, outlining the core principles of the correlator algorithm. He displayed lines of code from the open-source software his father had used, showing its unique mathematical architecture. He then cross-referenced these with Ora's own publicly filed patents for Ora Terra, showing a statistical overlap so profound it could not be a coincidence. He had even found audio from an obscure podcast Marcus Thorne had recorded years before the partnership, where Thorne had dismissed artisanal data as a quaint but irrelevant hobby. He was not making an accusation. He was presenting a dataset. He was letting the map speak for itself. He was showing the ghost of Arden and Son living inside the machine of Ora. Finally, he clicked to his last slide. It was a simple side-by-side comparison. On the left, a page from his father's handwritten notebook showing a complex equation. On the right, a slide from Marcus Thorne's original Ora Terra launch presentation showing the very same equation, presented as Thorne's own revolutionary breakthrough. "A palimpsest," Alistair said, his voice quiet again, "reveals the traces of what was erased. The work of my family, the Arden family, was erased. But its ghost remains, and this map is its testimony." He looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose face was a mask of pale, frozen horror. "My real name is Alistair Arden," he declared to the stunned audience, "and I am here to correct the map." He then announced that the $10 million prize money from the Thorne Foundation would be used to create the Arden Institute for Cartographic Integrity, a nonprofit organization dedicated to open-source data ethics and verifying the provenance of intellectual work. He was using Thorne's own money to build a permanent public watchdog dedicated to preventing the very kind of theft Thorne himself had committed. The intellectual checkmate was absolute. The scandal was immediate and global. The story was irresistible. The tech titan exposed on his own stage at his own award ceremony by the ghost of the man he had wronged. Ora's stock cratered. Thorne's reputation as a visionary was not just tarnished. It was vaporized. He was revealed as a fraud, a brilliant marketer who had stolen the soul of another man's work and presented it as his own. The board of directors at Ora forced his resignation within a week. Alistair Arden did not return to the Bloomsbury workshop. He had no need to. He had reclaimed his family's legacy on a scale his father could never have dreamed of. His revenge was not in destroying Marcus Thorne, but in creating something new and positive from the wreckage of his betrayal. He had used the principles of his family's art, truth, evidence, and the revelation of hidden patterns to deliver a form of justice that was as elegant, as precise, and as permanent as a perfectly drawn map. He had not just corrected a lie. He had redrawn the boundaries of intellectual integrity for the entire world to see.